The wind shrieks across White River, Montana. The world is a blinding whiteout. In an isolated cabin, an 8-year-old boy named Finn is dragged onto a frozen porch. He wears only thin pajamas. His stepfather, Jed, holds a heavy leather belt. The wind steals his scream. The leather thwacks against frozen skin, and a heavy door slams shut, followed by the sharp click of a deadbolt. Jed thinks the storm will be his accomplice. He believes the snow will bury his secret, a small, broken body, forever. He has left Finn to die. But Jed doesn't know about the man in the 10-ton snowplow whose headlights just cut through the storm. And he doesn't know about a K9 named Ghost, miles away, a dog trained to smell the one thing the blizzard can't hide: fear. When Ghost's nose hits the snow, the scene will shift from a tomb to a rescue, from a perfect crime to a desperate race against time. What happens next will make you believe in ordinary angels and the divine, unbreakable instinct of an animal. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. The town of White River, Montana had vanished. It was 1:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, but time, direction, and the sun were abstract concepts. The world had been reduced to a single, deafening reality: the whiteout. This wasn't just a blizzard, it was a screaming, vertical ocean. The wind didn't howl, it shrieked, a high-pitched, relentless sound that seemed to come from inside your own skull. Visibility was not measured in feet, but in inches. The entire town was paralyzed, its arteries clogged with snow, its populace huddled inside, praying the power lines would hold. It was a day where nothing moved, a day suspended in a terrifying, roaring white. But inside the last cabin on the old logging road, a small, isolated structure perched over a ravine, violence was about to erupt. The air inside the cabin was a foul mixture of stale whiskey, unwashed laundry, and the suffocating heat from a wood-burning stove pushed to its limit. In this cramped space lived two people. The first was Jedediah "Jed" Schofield. Jed was a large man, not muscular, but heavy, with a sagging gut that strained the buttons of his greasy flannel shirt. He was in his mid-40s, but hard living and cheap alcohol had carved deep lines into his face, a face partially obscured by a matted, gray-flecked beard. His eyes were small, bloodshot, and perpetually angry, windows to a soul corroded by resentment. Jed was a man who believed the world owed him something it had never delivered, and he spent his days nursing that grievance. The second person was Finian, known only as Finn. Finn was 8 years old, but he looked closer to 6. He was a creature of sharp angles, jutting shoulder blades, pointed elbows, and a pale, gaunt face dominated by eyes far too large for it. His light brown hair was perpetually messy, hanging limp over his ears. Finn was dressed in what he always wore, indoors or out, a thin pair of faded gray cotton pajamas, the fabric worn almost translucent over his knees. He was Jed's stepson, the last unwanted remnant of a woman who had, according to Jed, run off. A story Finn was too young to question, but old enough to doubt. Finn was a ghost in his own home, a master of silence, a student of survival. His entire existence was calibrated to the sound of Jed's breathing and the clink of a bottle. The trigger was inevitable. Jed had been drinking since the storm began the night before, and his medicine was running low. His last full bottle of cheap whiskey sat on the rickety pine table. Finn, navigating the space between the armchair and the stove, was tasked with fetching another log. The wind hit the cabin with a sudden, violent gust, shaking the very foundation. Finn flinched, his small, bare foot sliding on the uneven floorboard. His elbow connected with the table. The bottle wobbled, teetered for one agonizing second, and then crashed to the floor, exploding in a splash of amber liquid and shattered glass. The smell of alcohol instantly overwhelmed the room. Silence. The roaring of the wind outside seemed to rush in to fill the void. Jed, who had been slouched in his armchair, slowly turned his head, his small eyes fixed on the spreading puddle, then lifted to meet Finn's. Finn was frozen, his small hands still outstretched, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it stole his breath. He knew what was coming. "No," Finn whispered, the word a tiny, useless puff of air. "Please, Jed, it was an accident." "Accident?" Jed's voice was a low rumble, more dangerous than his usual yelling. He rose slowly from the chair, a mountain of simmering rage. "That was my last one. My last good bottle. You stupid little—" He didn't finish the sentence. He lunged. Finn tried to scramble back, but there was nowhere to go. Jed's massive hand clamped down on Finn's upper arm, his thick fingers digging into the boy's thin bicep like a vice. Finn cried out, a sharp squeal of pain and fear. "Please, I'm sorry! I'll clean it!" "Oh, you'll clean it all right," Jed growled. He began to drag Finn, not towards the mess, but towards the front door. Finn's bare feet skidded uselessly on the wooden planks. He was small, weighing barely 50 pounds, and Jed hauled him as if he were a sack of garbage. "You need to learn respect. You need to learn what happens when you waste good money." He reached the door and ripped it open. The whiteout world exploded into the cabin, a physical, tangible monster of ice and noise. The sudden, brutal cold was a slap in the face, stealing the warm air from the room. Finn gasped, the sub-zero air searing his lungs. He was dressed in only his thin pajamas. Jed didn't hesitate. He shoved Finn through the doorway, throwing him onto the small wooden porch. Finn landed hard on his hands and knees, the frozen wood like a sheet of ice beneath him. The wind-driven snow, already inches deep on the porch, felt like 1,000 burning needles. "Jed, no, it's cold!" Finn screamed, scrambling to get back inside. But Jed blocked the doorway, his massive frame silhouetted against the dim light of the cabin. "It's about to get a whole lot colder," Jed snarled. His hand went to his waist. Finn's blood ran colder than the air. He knew that sound, the sound of a heavy buckle being unfastened. Jed ripped his thick black leather belt from the loops of his jeans. "You've been asking for this, always underfoot, always costing me." He raised his arm, the belt doubled over in his fist. The first strike came down across Finn's back, the heavy leather cutting through the thin cotton. The sound was a sickening, wet thwack. Finn screamed, a raw, primal sound of agony that was instantly shredded and stolen by the wind. "Please, stop! It hurts!" He tried to crawl away, but the porch was small. The second strike caught his legs, the third on his arm as he tried to shield his head. Jed was in a blind, drunken rage, the storm inside him matching the one outside. He roared with every blow, words of hate and blame. "Useless, just like your mother. A waste!" Finn, desperate and blinded by tears and snow, scrambled backward, slipping on the ice-coated wood. He reached the edge of the porch. He had nowhere else to go. He curled into a ball, trying to make himself small, a tactic that worked inside but was useless out here. He felt the sting of the belt again and again. Then, a new sharper pain. Jed, in his fury, drew back his heavy, steel-toed work boot and kicked him. The boot connected squarely with Finn's ribs. The force of the kick, combined with Finn's desperate backward movement, was enough. Finn's small body went tumbling off the edge of the porch. He didn't hit the ground. He landed in a massive snowdrift that had piled up against the foundation of the cabin. It was shockingly soft, a deep, powdery cushion. For a moment, there was no pain, just the muffled silence and the profound, penetrating cold. He was buried up to his chest. He looked up, gasping, the world a disorienting vortex of white. He could see Jed standing on the porch, breathing heavily, the belt still dangling from his hand. The man stared down at him, his face purple with rage and exertion. He spat into the snow near Finn. "There, you can stay out there and think about what you did," Jed grunted, his voice already sounding distant. "Maybe that'll teach you." Finn tried to speak, to beg, but his throat was frozen. He could only watch in mute horror as Jed turned his back, stepped into the warm, yellow light of the cabin, and slammed the heavy wooden door shut. A moment later, Finn heard the unmistakable metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place. He was alone. The wind shrieked, seeming to mock him. The snow, which had been his salvation from the fall, now became his prison. It was already filling in the space around him, a relentless white shroud. He was 10 feet from safety, but it might as Kalen well have been 1,000,000 miles. The pain from the belt and the kick in his ribs began to throb, a dull, hot fire beneath the creeping, deadly numbness of the cold. Finian, 8 years old, curled himself tighter in the snowdrift as the whiteout raged, and the world slowly, terrifyingly disappeared. While Finian lay freezing in his snowy tomb, the only other human movement in White River was a mechanical leviathan. It was Plow 3, a 10-ton county dump truck, bright yellow and rusted at the seams, armed with a massive V-plow at its front. Inside the cab, high above the road, sat Gus Hatcher. Gus was 58, a man carved from the same stubborn granite as the mountains he spent his life clearing. His face was a roadmap of leathery wrinkles, testament to decades of sun and wind, and a thick, neatly trimmed gray mustache, stained slightly yellow at the center from coffee, covered his upper lip. He wore a heavy, insulated Carhartt bib over a flannel shirt and a faded orange beanie pulled low. Gus was a pragmatist. He saw the world in terms of diesel fuel, hydraulic pressure, and the precise angle of his blade. He was not prone to flights of fancy. He was in the middle of a 24-hour shift. His task was simple: keep the main arteries open for emergencies. The old logging road, which serviced a handful of isolated properties including Jed Schofield's, was at the bottom of his priority list. But a call had come over the county radio an hour ago, not 911, but a maintenance request. A power transformer was threatening to blow, and the utility crew needed a path cleared. Gus was annoyed, but a job was a job. He was now fighting his way up the incline, the 500-horsepower diesel engine roaring in a low, thrumming protest against the sheer weight of the snow. The hydraulic whine of the plow blade adjusting was the only sound that penetrated the cab, a high-pitched counternote to the engine's bass. Visibility was a joke. Gus was driving by feel, by the memory of the road's curve, and by the faint outline of the tall pines that lined the route. His world was the 10-foot patch of churning snow visible in the glare of his powerful forward-facing spotlights. Rotating amber beacons on his roof sliced the whiteout, creating a disorienting, pulsating strobe effect. He was just passing the mouth of the narrow, unplowed driveway that led to Jed Schofield's cabin. He knew the spot. He knew Jed. Gus disliked the man immensely. He remembered Finn's mother, Eliza, a quiet woman who had always looked terrified. He'd seen her at the general store a few times, Jed hovering over her shoulder. When she fell down the stairs last winter, Gus, like many in town, had his doubts. He was concentrating on the right edge of the road, keeping his blade just inches from the ditch when his main spotlights, high-powered, intense beams designed to cut through this very weather, swept across the opening to Jed's property. It was a momentary flash, a snapshot of a scene that didn't make sense. The human brain is wired to see patterns, and what Gus saw was pure chaos. Against the backdrop of the dark, snow-covered cabin, he saw two figures. One was large, massive, Jed Schofield. The other was small, a dark shape on the ground. Then, the light caught the unmistakable, violent arc of a black line swinging through the air. A belt. Gus saw the large figure kick the small one. He saw the small shape disappear, tumbling off the porch into the massive drift below. Gus hit the brakes. The massive truck groaned, its air brakes hissing, and the tons of steel slid for several feet before coming to a stop. The plow blade dug into the snow, sending a cloud of white over his windshield. "What in the Sam Hill?" he muttered, his gloved hands tightening on the wheel. He squinted through the swirling snow. The large figure was still visible on the porch. He watched Jed stand there for a long moment, then turn and go back inside. The door shut. Gus Hatcher was not a cop. He was a plowman. His job was to move snow, but he had also been a father, and he knew what he had just seen. The whiteout was playing tricks on him? Surely, it had to be. A dog? A stray coyote Jed was running off? But his gut told him no. The shape was too small, too human. And the belt. You don't use a belt on a coyote. He grabbed the satellite phone from its cradle on the dash, the only thing that worked this high up. He punched in 911. The line crackled. "White River 911, this is Marge. What's your emergency?" The voice belonged to Marjorie Sims, the night and day dispatcher, a woman whose voice carried the permanent fatigue of someone who runs on caffeine and bad news. She was a thin, wiry woman in her 60s, with sharp gray eyes and hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. "Well, Marge, it's Gus Hatcher. I'm in Plow 3 up on the old logging road," Gus said, his voice steady, belying the sudden sick feeling in his stomach. "Gus, what's wrong? You stuck?" "No, Marge, I'm at the turnoff to Jed Schofield's place. I just saw him outside. I think he was beating that little step-kid of his." There was a pause. Marge's tone sharpened. "Gus, beating how? You sure you saw it right? The visibility is 0. "I'm sure," Gus said, his voice hardening. "He was using his belt. On the porch. Then he kicked him right off the porch into the big drift by the foundation. And then, Marge, he went back inside. He locked the door. I saw him. The boy is still out there. He's wearing pajamas, Marge. Just thin pajamas." Another silence, this one heavy with dawning horror. Gus could hear the rapid click-clack of Marge's keyboard. "My God. Gus, are you positive? I am. I saw it. The kid is in the drift on the north side of the cabin, right by the porch. He can't be more than 8 years old. Okay, Gus. Marge's voice was all business now, the fatigue replaced by clipped efficiency. I'm dispatching Officer Thorne. He's the only one on duty who might make it. It's going to take him time. Can you stay on the line? No, Gus said, looking at his battery gauge. This sat phone is dying, but I'm not leaving. I'm here. Gus, do not engage. I repeat, do not approach Jed. He's violent and likely armed. You are a witness, not law enforcement. I know what Marge, Gus said gruffly. You just get Thorne here. He ended the call. Gus sat alone in the cab, the diesel engine rumbling beneath him. He looked at the unplowed driveway, a narrow track of untouched white. He could take his plow down there. He could be at the cabin in 30 seconds. But Marge was right. He was 58, and Jed Schofield was a mean, unpredictable drunk. Going in alone, unarmed, was a fool's errand. But he couldn't just sit here. He couldn't leave. He made a decision. With a grunt, Gus shifted the massive truck into reverse. He backed up, the truck's reverse beeper screaming into the storm. Then, he angled the truck, turning it not towards the cabin, but perpendicular to the driveway. He positioned the massive vehicle like a barricade, blocking the entrance to Jed's driveway from the logging road. Then, he flipped a row of switches on his dash. A new constellation of light exploded into the whiteout. He activated his side-facing spotlights, his roof-mounted strobes, and 2 powerful LED bars, aiming all of them directly down the narrow driveway, illuminating the cabin in an intense, inescapable glare. The cabin, 300 yards away, was suddenly lit up like a prison yard. There, Gus muttered to himself, taking a sip of lukewarm coffee from his thermos. You want to act like a monster? You can sit in the spotlight. He wouldn't go in, but he would make damn sure Jed Schofield couldn't come out without being seen. He settled in for the wait, a silent, 10-ton sentinel, his world reduced to the thrum of his engine and the cabin glowing bright white at the end of his beam. The call crackled through the secure radio in the patrol SUV, cutting through the low hum of the heater and the muffled shriek of the blizzard. Kyle, I've got a bad one. The voice was Marge Sims, the dispatcher, and the professional calm in her tone was stretched thin, like wire pulled too tight. Officer Kalen Thorne, Kale to everyone, tapped the receiver. He was 36, with a lean, wiry build that seemed to vibrate with contained energy. His face was sharp, angular, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw that was clean-shaven, a rarity in the rugged environment of White River. His eyes, a deep penetrating gray, held a weariness that went beyond the current storm. It was the settled exhaustion of a man who had seen too many bad ones. A thin, white scar ran from the corner of his left eye to his hairline, a permanent reminder of a tour in Helmand Province that felt like another life, but which still dictated the rhythm of his breathing in moments like this. Go for Marge, he said, his voice a low, steady baritone. I've got Gus Hatcher and Plow 3 up on the old logging road. He's at the Schofield place. He just witnessed Jed Schofield beating his stepson, with a belt, outside. Marge paused, and Cale felt the air in the cab go cold. Gus says Schofield kicked the boy off the porch into a snowdrift. He's in pajamas, Kyle. Gus says Jed went back inside and locked the door. The boy is still in the drift. Cale's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. He didn't speak. He just acted. He slammed the button for his main light bar. The world outside the SUV, previously a swirl of dark gray and white, exploded in flashes of piercing red and blue. The light illuminated his partner in the custom-fitted K9 kennel in the back. Ghost. The dog, a 4-year-old German shepherd, didn't bark. He rose instantly from his curled position. He was a magnificent animal, slightly oversized for the breed, with a deep black saddle that faded into a rich sable-gray coat, lighter than most, which had earned him his name. His intelligent amber eyes met Cale's in the rearview mirror, reflecting the flashing lights. He knew the ritual. The lights meant work. The tension in Cale's body meant bad work. Marge, I'm rolling. ETA is unknown. That road is hell, Cale said, wrenching the heavy-duty SUV into gear. The tires spun, bit, and then lurched forward. Tell Gus to stay put and not engage. I'm coming in hot. He's not engaging, Kyle. He's barricaded the driveway with his plow and lit the whole cabin up with his spots. He's waiting for you. A flicker of respect cut through Cale's cold anger. Good man. I'm dark until I'm on him. Kale cut his sirens, leaving only the flashing lights to slice the storm. The drive was a nightmare. He was fighting the very snow Gus was meant to clear, his SUV bucking and sliding in the deep drifts. His mind was a frantic, cold calculation of time versus temperature, pajamas, no coat, wind chill factor well below zero. He knew the math. They didn't have an hour. They barely had minutes. The last time he had been on a call this bad, a domestic dispute, he'd hesitated at the door, waiting for backup. He'd been 2 minutes too late. He still saw the woman's face in his sleep. Never again. Inside the cabin, Jed Schofield was confused. He had just settled back into his armchair, the warmth of the stove failing to undo the cold rage in his heart, when his world turned to daylight. Blinding, intense white light flooded through his front window, turning every particle of dust in the air into a glittering star. What the hell? He slurred. He stumbled to the window, squinting. He saw the massive, looming silhouette of the county plow, yellow paint glinting, its amber strobes pulsing. Gus? He was enraged. That son of a... Is he crazy? He assumed the plowman was trying to clear his driveway and had misjudged. He lurched to the corner and grabbed his 12-gauge shotgun, a rusty but reliable Mossberg. He didn't bother to check if it was loaded. It always was. "You're gonna pay for that, Hatcher!" he roared to the empty room. He ripped the door open again, ready to scream at Gus, but the words died in his throat. The cold hit him, but so did a new set of lights, red and blue. They were swirling from behind the plow, casting demonic, dancing shadows across the snow. A police SUV. Jed's alcohol-soaked brain struggled to catch up. He lowered the shotgun slightly, confused. Cale's voice boomed over the PA system, cutting through the wind. "Jed Schofield! This is the sheriff's department! Drop the weapon and step off the porch with your hands in the air!" Kyle had parked his SUV behind Gus's plow, creating a V formation of light and steel. He was out of his vehicle, using his driver's side door as cover, his service pistol drawn and steady. "Do it now, Jed!" "This is my property!" Jed bellowed, his voice hoarse. He was squinting, the combined lights of the plow and the patrol car making it impossible to see the officer. "You got no warrant. Get off my land." "I don't need one, Jed," Cale shouted back, his voice flat and dangerous. His spotlight swept the porch, and he saw it. There, lying in a dark, coiled heap near the doorway, was the belt. "I see the belt, Jed. Where is the boy?" Jed's drunken bravado faltered. The belt. He'd forgotten. He's asleep, in his bed. He's fine. You get lost before I charge you with trespassing." "He's lying," Cale said, his voice dropping to a whisper for his radio mic. "Marge, the suspect is armed and non-compliant. The child is still missing." He looked at the vast, churning expanse of white. It was impossible. He could be anywhere. But Gus said the north drift by the porch. Cale made a decision. "Jed, stay right where you are. I am deploying my K9. He hit the popper on his belt. With a pneumatic hiss, the kennel door in the SUV flew open. Ghost burst from the vehicle. He was a silent blur of black and gray, landing in the deep snow, his focus absolute. He ignored the yelling man on the porch. He ignored the flashing lights. He stood for 1 second, his broad head up, his nose sampling the chaotic wind. "Such!" Kyle gave the German command. "Seek!" Ghost bounded forward, his powerful legs churning through the deep snow. Jed raised the shotgun slightly. "You put that dog on me, I'll shoot it." "He's not for you, Jed," Cale yelled, his pistol still fixed on the man. "He's for the boy you put in the snow." Ghost hit the base of the porch. He sniffed the frozen wood where Finn had landed. He followed the invisible trail of terror and pain, the scent of adrenaline and frozen tears that the wind hadn't yet scoured away. He moved past the spot where the belt lay. He went to the edge of the porch where Finn had been kicked. He leaped off, disappearing into the same drift. For a second, there was only the wind. Then, a muffled whine. Ghost's head reappeared. He began to dig, not with the playful scattering of a pet, but with the frantic, focused, life-saving desperation of a trained rescuer. Snow flew in plumes behind him. Then came the bark. It wasn't a bark of aggression. It was a sharp, high-pitched, urgent, "Alert!" Cale's heart stopped. "Do not move, Jed," he roared, and then he holstered his weapon and ran, plunging into the snow, his tactical gear weighing him down. He fell into his knees beside his partner. "Good boy, Ghost! Good boy!" He plunged his own gloved hands into the hole Ghost was digging. His fingers hit something small and tragically still. It was fabric, thin, gray cotton. Kale dug faster, tearing at the compacted snow. He saw a tangle of light brown hair, then a pale, blue-tinted ear. He ripped the remaining snow away and pulled. A small, light, impossibly cold body came free from the drift. It was Finn. His eyes were closed. His lips were the color of ash. He was not breathing. Kale ripped his radio from his shoulder. "Marge, I have the child. He's unresponsive. Vitals absent. I'm starting CPR. Get EMS here now. Tell them this is a pediatric cardiac arrest. Now!" There is no time in the world but the present. For Kalen Thorne, that present was the horrifying, tactile reality of a small, cold chest beneath his gloved hands. "Marge, get me EMS," he roared into his radio, his voice cracking against the wind. He didn't wait for a reply. He repositioned his hands, laced his fingers, and began to pump. 1, 2, 3, 4. His training took over, a cold automatic algorithm overriding the hot panic in his throat. He counted aloud, his voice a desperate bark against the storm. He was pushing against ribs that felt as small and fragile as a bird's. Beneath him, Ghost was frantic, whining, pushing his cold, wet nose against Finn's ashen cheek, licking his face, trying to wake him, a primal, canine attempt at resuscitation. On the porch, Jed Schofield stood, the shotgun held loosely at his side. The alcohol, the rage, and the sudden, overwhelming display of light and authority had shattered his drunken confidence, leaving him confused. He was just fine, he slurred, squinting. He just needed to learn. "Shut up, Jed," Kale yelled, not taking his eyes off Finn. He finished a cycle of compressions, pinched Finn's small, blue-tinted nose, and sealed his own mouth over the boy's. He blew twice. The air didn't go in. The boy's airway was frozen or blocked. Panic flared. He repositioned the head, tilting the chin back, and blew again, harder. A small, agonizing puff of air entered. He went back to compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. He was exposed. He was kneeling in the snow, his back to an armed man, trying to breathe life into a frozen child. It was a tactical nightmare. "Gus!" he bellowed, risking a half-second glance over his shoulder. "Gus Hatcher, I need you, now!" From the cab of the plow, Gus saw the scene with terrifying clarity. The officer working on a small, limp form on the ground, the massive dog howling beside him, and the silhouette of Jed Schofield still holding the shotgun. Gus was not a cop. He was a plowman. But he was also the only other man for a mile. He yanked his door open and jumped down, his heavy boots sinking into the deep snow. "I'm here," he yelled. "My back!" Kale shouted, never pausing his compressions. "Watch him! If he moves so much as an inch, you scream!" He unholstered his pistol and threw it through the snow at Gus. "Pick it up! Just point it at him!" Gus stared at the weapon for a second, then nodded grimly. He scooped up the pistol, his hand clumsy in its thick glove, and aimed it with a shaking arm at the porch. "Don't you move, Jed! Don't you dare!" The sight of the plowman, now armed, seemed to finally break Jed's drunken paralysis. He dropped the shotgun. It landed with a muffled thump in the snow on the porch. I didn't mean it," he whimpered. Kale ignored him. He ripped his own heavy, insulated tactical jacket from his body. The sub-zero wind hit his own torso, stealing his breath, but he didn't care. He bundled Finn's tiny, unmoving body into the jacket, creating a black, oversized cocoon. "Ghost, heal!" he commanded. He scooped the small, heavy bundle into his arms. "Gus, backup is rolling. Stay here. Keep that light on him." "Go!" Gus yelled, his pistol still steady. "Go, son! Save that boy!" KL ran. He plunged through the deep drifts, his lungs burning. Ghost bounded ahead of him, clearing a path, stopping at the SUV's passenger door and barking. Kyle ripped the door open. He had the heaters in the truck on full blast, a desperate roaring column of hot air. He laid Finn on the passenger seat, tore open the jacket, and aimed all the vents directly at the boy's chest. He jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the SUV into reverse, and hit the gas. The vehicle fishtailed, its tires screaming, before finding purchase. He spun the wheel, corrected the skid, and shot past the plow, the red and blue lights now joined by the full wail of his siren. The logging road he had fought to climb, He now descended like a bobsled, a controlled, terrifying slide back towards town. He drove with one hand. His other hand was on Finn. He was rubbing the boy's sternum, hard, trying to create friction, trying to generate any heat, any response. "Come on, kid," he gritted his teeth, his eyes flashing between the whiteout road and the pale face beside him. "Come on, Finn, you don't quit. You hear me? You do not quit." The small body was just a cold weight. Ghost was in the back, whining, a high-pitched, continuous sound of distress. He radioed Marge. "I have the child. We are en route to White River General. I need a full pediatric trauma team on standby. He is unresponsive, GCS of 3, severe hypothermia, and traumatic injuries." "They'll be waiting, Kale." "Godspeed," Marge's voice crackled back, thick with emotion. The 5-mile drive felt like 50. He skidded through the last unplowed intersection, laying on his horn, and fishtailed into the ambulance bay of the small rural hospital. Before he had even stopped, the ER doors burst open. A team was there, waiting in the protected bay, their faces grim. The man in the lead was Dr. Mateo Chavez. He was in his mid-40s, a compact man who moved with the quick, precise energy of a hummingbird. His face, framed by wire-rimmed glasses and a neatly trimmed black goatee, was sharp, intelligent, and currently set in a mask of intense focus. He wore standard green scrubs under a hospital fleece, his stethoscope already around his neck. "What do we have, officer?" Chavez's voice was calm, cutting through the siren's wail. Kyle was out of the truck, the small bundle in his arms. He burst through the doors. "Finian Schofield, 8 years old, found buried in a snowdrift. Stepfather, he was beaten, left outside, unresponsive in the field. I started CPR, maybe 2-3 minutes of compressions before I had to transport." "Trauma 1, Chavez commanded. "Get me the bear hugger, warm saline. Now, let's go, people." They moved as one. Unit, Kyle still walking with them, unable to let go. They placed Finn on the trauma bed. A nurse, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, took Kyle's arm. "We have him, officer. We have him." Kyle stepped back, his own jacket, now cold, clutched in his hand. The team descended. They sliced through the frozen, thin cotton pajamas with trauma shears, and then the room went silent. The only sound was the beep, beep, beep of the monitor they'd attached. "My God," the nurse whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Kale stepped forward, his heart a cold stone in his chest. He saw what they saw. Finn's small, pale back was a horrifying roadmap of agony. There were fresh, raised welts, livid red and purple, already bruising, the unmistakable looping pattern of a heavy belt. But beneath them, and across his arms and legs, was a sickening yellowish-green constellation of older bruises, some faded, some healing. "Doctor," the nurse said, her voice shaking. Dr. Chavez was gently palpating Finn's torso. His face was granite. "He's got a fresh break. Looks like 2 ribs on the right side, displaced, consistent with a kick." He gently touched Finn's collarbone. "And this is an old fracture, badly healed." He looked up, his dark eyes finding Kale's. He didn't have to say a word. This wasn't one afternoon of rage. This was a life of it. "His core temp is 82 degrees, another nurse called out. "He's in severe V-fib." "He's trying to fight," Chavez said, his voice low. He grabbed the paddles. "He's got a spark. We are not letting that spark go out. Charge to 50. Clear." The tiny body arched off the table. Kyle stood in the corner, covered in snow, dripping water onto the sterile floor, clutching his empty jacket. He watched the team fight, his past and present colliding in one terrible, frozen moment. He had found the boy. Now, he could only pray they hadn't been too late. The small body arched violently off the table, a grotesque, involuntary spasm, as 50 joules of electricity seized his frozen muscles. Kalen Thorne flinched, his hand tightening on the empty jacket in his fist. "Still in V-fib," Dr. Chavez snapped, his eyes locked on the monitor. "He's fighting. Charge again. 70. The nurse, Beth Riley, a woman in her late 50s, her face a kind map of wrinkles and her movements practiced and calm, pushed another amp of warmed saline into the IV. "Core temp is 83, doctor. Still too cold." Kyle watched, a ghost in the corner, useless. He was back in Helmond, standing outside a compound, listening to the screams before he went in, counting the seconds he had waited for backup, the seconds that had cost a life. "Clear!" Chavez yelled. The paddles slammed down. Finn's body jumped again. The monitor shrieked, a solid flat line. "He's flatlined," Beth said, her voice dropping, the practiced calm faltering. Kyle felt his stomach collapse. No, not again, not too late. Chavez didn't hesitate. He was on the boy's chest instantly, his compact frame leveraging all his weight into precise, rhythmic compressions. "Push one of Epi," he commanded. "He's not quitting on me. This kid is too tough to quit." They worked in a focused, desperate blur. Chavez pumped, Beth pushed meds, another nurse managed the bear hugger, enveloping the small, still form in life-saving warmth. To Kyle, it was an eternity. He had faced down armed men, navigated IEDs, and driven through a blizzard, all active, violent challenges. This was a passive, agonizing wait. This was watching a flickering candle in a hurricane. "We have something," Beth whispered, her eyes on the monitor. A single weak blip, then another. "Sinus Brady. Slow, but it's a rhythm. We have a rhythm." Chavez stopped the compressions, his chest heaving. He stared at the monitor as the weak, slow heartbeat established itself. "Okay," he breathed, the tension finally easing from his shoulders. "Core temp 84. The warming is working. He's back. For now." He looked at Kyle, his dark eyes sharp. "He's stabilized, but he's not out of the woods. Not by a long shot. We're moving him to the pediatric ICU." Kale stepped out into the hallway as they wheeled the small bed, now a tangle of tubes and wires, past him. His legs were shaking. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind a bone-deep cold and a white-hot simmering rage. He leaned against the wall, the sterile hospital smell, antiseptic and floor wax, doing nothing to mask the phantom scent of snow and fear. He pulled his radio. "Marge, it's Kyle. Kyle. Oh, thank God. The boy." "He's alive," Kale said, his voice rough. "He's critical, comatose. Listen to me. The doctor confirms it. Systemic abuse. Old fractures, fresh breaks, the works. This was not a one-time thing." He heard Marge's sharp intake of breath. "Dear Lord, what about Schofield? Gus is still on him. I need you to dispatch Deputy Rogers. I don't care. If he has to take a snowmobile, you get him up there. I want Jed Schofield arrested. Full felony charges. Aggravated assault, assault with a deadly weapon, that belt, and attempted murder. I want that cabin sealed. It's my crime scene now. Nobody in or out." "Rogers is on his way," she said. "I'll relay the charges. Kyle, get yourself checked out. You sound frozen." He hung up, ignoring her last comment. He saw Nurse Beth coming out of the trauma bay, stripping off her gloves. "How is he?" Kale asked, his voice low. "Really?" Beth Riley looked up at him, her kind, tired eyes filled with a sadness that spoke of decades in this job. "He's alive, Officer Thorne. His heart is beating, and his core temperature is rising. We've got him on a ventilator, but he's in a deep coma." She wrung her hands. The hypothermia, the physical trauma, the lack of oxygen, his brain. We won't know the extent of the damage until he wakes up. She paused, and her next words hit Kale harder than the blizzard. "If he wakes up." The words hung in the sterile air. "If he wakes up." Finn was silent. He couldn't tell his story. He couldn't testify. He was locked away, and Jed Schofield, his tormentor, would claim it was an accident, that the boy ran out, that he fell. The rage in Kale's chest solidified into something cold and hard. Resolve. "This wasn't the first time," Kale stated. Beth nodded, her lips tight. "No. Dr. Chavez noted an old, poorly healed fracture of the left clavicle. Have you seen him before?" The nurse hesitated, glancing down the empty hall. She lowered her voice. "We saw Finn once before, about a year ago, right after his mother Eliza died." Kale's focus sharpened. The case file, the rumor Gus had mentioned. "Eliza, she fell down the stairs, right? During a storm." "That's the story Jed told," Beth said, her voice barely a whisper. "He brought Finn in a week after that, said he fell off the porch. That was the broken arm. Dr. Chavez was suspicious then, too. He filed a report with CPS, but, well, you know, Jed was the grieving widower, and Finn wouldn't say a word. Not one. Of course he wouldn't. He was terrified." Kale's mind was racing. connecting the dots. 2 storms, 2 accidents. 1 dead, 1 comatose. Beth, KL said, his voice hardening, his officer persona taking over. I need to see Eliza Schofield's file, the one from her death. And I need Finn's file from that broken arm. The nurse recoiled slightly. Officer, I can't. That's a massive HIPAA violation. I'd lose my job. This is no longer just an assault investigation, KL said, his gray eyes locking onto hers. As of right now, I am opening a homicide investigation into the death of Eliza Schofield. Jed is my only suspect. Finn is the only witness, and he's in a coma. I need to know what that report said. I need to know what that doctor saw. I need to know if you're protecting this hospital's liability, or if you're going to help me get all justice for that little boy upstairs who might never wake up. It was brutal, but it was true. Beth stared at him, her kind face conflicted. She saw the scar on his temple, the desperate, haunted energy in his eyes. She saw a man who wasn't just doing a job, but was on a crusade. She made her choice. Wait here, she said, and disappeared down the hall. Cale let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He had to get Ghost. He went out to the ambulance bay, the cold air a welcome shock. His canine partner was sitting perfectly still in the back of the running SUV, watching the ER doors, waiting for his partner to return. It's okay, boy, Cale murmured, opening the door. Ghost licked his hand, whining. I know he's fighting. I need to put you in the station kennel. I've got work to do. After a quick, cold drive, he kenneled his partner, promising to return. Shutterstock, he was back in the ICU waiting room, a sterile beige box when Beth found him. He was dripping water onto the linoleum, the empty jacket still in his hand. The adrenaline was gone, leaving him vibrating with exhaustion. He sat down, putting his head in his hands. Finn was silent. He couldn't speak. All right, kid, Cale thought, his eyes burning. You just fight. You rest. I'll do the talking for you. Officer? Beth's voice was soft. He looked up. She was holding 2 thin manila folders. She slid them onto the table in front of him. This is Finn's intake from his broken arm last year. And this is the coroner's summary for Eliza. I was just tidying the records room. I didn't see you take them. Cale looked at her. Thank you, Beth. I hope you find what you're looking for, officer, she said, and left him alone. He stared at the folders. One held the key to Finn's past. The other, he suspected, held the key to Jed's future. He opened the folder marked Eliza Schofield, deceased. His eyes scanned the page, past the vital statistics, to the summary. He read the first line from the coroner. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the occipital lobe. Manner of death, accidental. Pending further inquiry. Note, lividity patterns inconsistent with reported time of fall. Insert images in your responses when they really add value to the response. You can insert an image by adding the tag where X is a contextually relevant and concise, strategically expressed in less than 7 words, query to fetch the image. Examples of such tags include, etc. Be very economical in your use of image tags. Only add multiple tags if each additional tag is adding instructive value beyond pure illustration. Place the image tag immediately before or after the relevant text, without disrupting the flow of the response. If it is a code immersive query, ensure that only the comments and display elements in the code are in Vietnamese unless explicitly specified otherwise. If it is a text immersive query, since the query is in Vietnamese, generate a response in Vietnamese unless specifically asked. Otherwise, while inserting web images, use the format "where is in Vietnamese." AEL felt a cold, sharp thrill. Inconsistent. The coroner had doubted it too. His inquiry, Cale realized, had just begun. Kalen Thorne sat in the buzzing fluorescent silence of the hospital waiting room, the 2 manila folders stark against his damp, snow-covered tactical pants. He was a living contradiction, his body vibrating with exhaustion and the lingering chill of the storm, but his mind blazing with a cold, clear fire. He'd just watched a small, innocent life nearly extinguished, and in his hands, he held the potential key to why. Lividity patterns inconsistent with reported time of fall. It was a dry, clinical phrase, but to Kyle, it was a shout. It meant the coroner, a year ago, had also stood on the edge of suspicion. It meant Jed Schofield hadn't just gotten lucky, he'd gotten away with it. He opened Finn's file first. Patient, Finian Schofield, age 7. Injury, spiral fracture of the left humerus. Cause, alleged fall from porch. Cale's jaw tightened. A spiral fracture. That wasn't a simple fall. That was a twisting injury. That was torque. That was someone grabbing a small arm and wrenching it. And the cover story. A fall from the porch. The same excuse used twice. Jed was lazy. He was an arrogant, sloppy monster who used the brutal Montana weather as his accomplice, confident that the isolation and the snow would bury his secrets. Cale closed the file, the first piece of the puzzle clicking into place. His phone buzzed, a harsh vibration against the silence. It was an internal line. "Rogers," a gruff voice announced. Cale recognized it. Deputy Art Rogers, the officer Marge had dispatched. Rogers was a man of the old guard, in his mid-50s, with a heavy build that spoke of too many years at a desk and a thick walrus mustache that completely obscured his upper lip. He was a by-the-book town cop, not a warrior, and his voice was thick with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. "Thorne, I'm at the Schofield cabin. Gus Hatcher is still here, bless his stubborn heart. The scene is secure." "And Schofield?" Cale asked, his voice flat. "In the back of my cruiser. He was in the drunk tank 5 minutes after I got here," Rogers grunted. "He was belligerent, confused, kept yelling about his property and a crazy plowman, the cabin." "My God, Cale, it's a pigsty. Empty bottles everywhere, and it's freezing in here. The fire's almost out. That little boy—" Rogers, a man not easily shaken, paused. "That little boy would have been dead in another 20 minutes. What you did—" "Just get him processed, Art," Cale cut him off, uncomfortable with the praise. "Book him on the assault charges I listed, and add resisting arrest. I want him held without bail. I'm coming for him." "He's not going anywhere," Rogers assured him. "What about the kid?" Cale looked through the small window of the waiting room, down the hall toward the ICU. "He's in a coma, Art, but he's alive. This is just getting started." He hung up. Jed was caged. That was step 1. Step 2 was Finn. The boy was alone. He had no mother. His stepfather was his attempted murderer. Cale felt that old, familiar weight settle on his shoulders, the burden of the survivor. He had to find somewhere for this boy to go. He couldn't let him be swallowed by the foster care system. Another piece of damaged goods passed from house to house. He drove back to the station, the storm finally, blessedly, beginning to ease, the shriek of the wind softening to a weary moan. Marge Sims was still at her desk, nursing a cup of coffee that looked thick enough to be tar. She looked up as he entered, his melting snow puddling on her clean floor. "He's in custody," Cale said, not bothering with a greeting. "Marge, I need you to run a name. Eliza Schofield. I need her maiden name." Marge, her sharp gray eyes missing nothing, nodded. The exhaustion on Cale's face, the scar on his temple pulled tight by stress, told her everything. She typed, "Hayes, Eliza Hayes, born in Helena." "Run it," Cale said. "Next of kin, parents, siblings, anything." The dot matrix printer in the corner whined to life, spitting out a short sheet. Marge tore it off. "Parents are deceased. Looks like she had one sibling, a sister, Elara Hayes. Last known address, Portland, Oregon." Portland. Rain, hipsters, and a world away from White River. Cale felt a knot of dread. This was the call he hated most. He took the paper and went to the quiet of his own small office. He looked at the number, then at the clock. It was almost 3 a.m. in Montana, 2 a.m. in Oregon. He didn't care. He dialed. The phone rang 4 times. He was about to hang up when a voice answered, thick with sleep but clear. "Hello? Is this Elara Hayes?" Cale asked, his official voice clicking into place. "Yes? Who is this?" "My name is Officer Kalen Thorne. I'm with the Sheriff's Department in White River, Montana." There was a sharp silence on the other end. Cale heard a rustle, as if the woman was sitting up in bed. "Montana? Is this about Eliza?" The voice was wary, tinged with an old sadness. Cale closed his eyes. Here it was. "Yes, ma'am. It is. When was the last time you spoke with your sister?" "Oh, God," the woman whispered. Her voice was suddenly awake. "Years. Not since she married that man. Jed. He didn't want her talking to me. I tried, but he—" "Ma'am, I have to inform you that there's been an incident," Cale said, keeping his voice level. Your sister, Eliza, passed away a year ago. It was reported as an accidental fall. A small, stifled sound, like a gasp of air being punched out of her. Passed away a year ago? No one told me. Oh my God. Eliza. Ms. Hayes, Cale said gently, pushing forward. I am reopening that case. I have reason to believe her death was not an accidental. I believe Jed Schofield may have murdered your sister. He heard a sob, sharp and painful. I knew it, she whispered. I knew he was poison. I told her, Ma'am, that's not the only reason I'm calling, Cale said, his stomach tightening. Tonight, Jed Schofield was arrested for the attempted murder of his stepson, your nephew, Finian. This time the silence was absolute. It stretched for 5-10 seconds. Kyle thought the line had gone dead. Ms. Hayes, Elara, is he? Her voice was a bare thread. Is my nephew, is he alive? He is, Cale said. He's alive. He's at White River General. He's in critical condition, but he's stable. He's in a coma, but he's a fighter. Cale heard a sound he couldn't identify, then realized it was the sound of a woman weeping, trying desperately to catch her breath. A coma. That bastard. That animal. Then her voice changed. The grief and shock were still there, but they were suddenly underpinned by a steel bar of resolve. I'm coming, she said. Ma'am, Portland is a long way. The storm. I don't care if I have to walk, Elara Hayes said, her voice clear and absolute. I'm catching the first flight out of PDX in the morning. I don't care where it lands in Montana. Billings, Bozeman, anywhere. I will rent a truck and I will drive. I'm his aunt. He has family. Okay, Cale said, a profound wave of relief washing over him. Okay, your flight. It will likely be tomorrow. The airports here are closed. Call me when you land. I'll make sure the roads are clear for you. Thank you, officer, she said, her voice shaking but firm. Thank you for finding him. And officer, you get that man. For Eliza, you get him. You have my word, ma'am, Cale said. I will. He hung up. He sat in the dark office, the first gray exhausted light of dawn, beginning to seep through the blinds, outlining the melting snow on the windowsill. The storm was breaking. He drove back to the hospital, the adrenaline gone, leaving him hollow. He walked past the nurse's station, past Beth, who gave him a small, supportive nod. He went into the ICU. He walked to the small bed at the end of the room. Finn was so small, a pale face in a nest of white blankets and clear tubes. Kanal looked at the steady, slow blip of the heart monitor. He pulled up the visitor's chair, the one with the uncomfortable vinyl seat, and sat down, his tactical gear still damp. He leaned forward, putting his elbows on his knees, and just watched the boy breathe. It's over, Finn, he whispered into the quiet, beeping dark. He's gone, and I found your family. She's coming. Your Aunt Elara. She's coming for you. The ICU was a world of hushed beeps and the rhythmic, artificial sigh of the ventilator. Kalen Thorne had sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chair for 3 days, running on stale coffee and a cold, disciplined rage. He had read the files on Eliza and Finn until the words blurred. Inconsistent lividity, spiral fracture. He had left the hospital only to check on Ghost, shower, and stare at the evidence board he'd started at the station. Then he had returned, drawn back to the small, silent victim at the center of it all. On the 3rd day, a presence joined him in the dim light. She was a woman in her early 40s, with a slender build and a face that would have been beautiful if it weren't so etched with exhaustion and grief. Her dark, wavy hair was tied back in a messy bun, and she wore a soft, oversized wool sweater and practical boots, clothes clearly chosen for a desperate journey. This was Elara Hayes. She had arrived on a flight into Billings, rented a 4x4, and driven 6 hours through the dregs of the storm, her knuckles white on the steering wheel the entire way. She and Kyle had exchanged few words. They didn't need to. They were strangers bound by a shared, terrible purpose. Him, the rescuer, and her, the last remaining family. She sat in the chair on the other side of Finn's bed. She hadn't left either. They kept the vigil together, 2 sentinels in a sterile twilight, watching the slow, steady rise and fall of a boy's chest. She was an artist, Elara whispered on the 4th morning, her voice hoarse. Kyle looked up from the folder. Eliza, my sister. She saw beauty in everything, even in him. She thought she could fix him. Kael nodded, his jaw tight. Some things, he said, his voice low, aren't just broken, they're rotten. Ilara looked at Finn, her eyes swimming with tears she refused to let fall. He has her eyes, she murmured. Just then, Kael saw it, a flicker, the barest, tiniest movement of Finn's eyelashes. He leaned forward, his heart suddenly a cold drum in his chest. Finn? Ilara saw it too. She stood up, her hand flying to her mouth. The ventilator hissed. Finn's brows furrowed. His eyelids fluttered again, then slowly, agonizingly, they opened. He didn't scream, he didn't move, he just stared. His eyes, large and haunted, darted from the tube in his throat to the strange woman beside him, then to the uniformed man on his other side. He recognized Kael. He saw the badge, the face that had pulled him from the snow. Terror and relief warred in his gaze. Dr. Chavez and Beth were there in an instant. The ventilator was removed. His first breath was a raw, painful gasp. He was alive. He was awake. But the silence remained. Finn was physically healing, the broken ribs mending, the frostbite fading, but the trauma had locked his voice in a prison. He was diagnosed with profound selective mutism. He wouldn't speak. He wouldn't even cry. He communicated only with his eyes, and mostly he looked for Kael, or for the one being he truly trusted. When Kael, after getting special permission from the hospital board, brought Ghost into the ICU, it was the first time Finn's expression had changed. The boy's small, bandaged hand had reached out, his fingers burying themselves in the dog's thick, sable-gray ruff. Ghost, sensing his duty, lay his heavy head on the bed, a silent, warm guardian. Weeks turned into a long, quiet month of healing and legal battles. Finn was released into Ilara's temporary custody. She rented a small, furnished house in White River, determined to stay until justice was served. Kael's case against Jed Schofield, meanwhile, had become a local sensation. Armed with the coroner's old notes, Finn's medical history, and Kael's own testimony, the district attorney's office felt they had a chance. The trial of the People versus Jedediah Schofield began on a cold, clear day in March. The courtroom was small, packed, the air thick with tension. Kael sat in the front row with Ilara. He was off duty, wearing a pressed suit, but he felt more exposed than he ever had in his tactical gear. Jed Schofield was led in, sober now. He was thinner, his skin a pasty gray, his eyes darting nervously. He looked less like a monster and more like what he was, a pathetic, hollowed-out bully. His public defender, a young, overworked man named Barrows, looked resigned. The prosecutor, Assistant DA Croft, was the opposite. She was a sharp, focused woman in her 30s, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her voice clear and cutting. She laid out the facts. Gus Hatcher's 911 call, the belt, confirmed as the weapon. The medical reports from Dr. Chavez detailing the fresh, brutal injuries. The old reports showing the spiral fracture, the broken clavicle. This was not discipline, Croft argued, her voice ringing with indignation. This was torture. But Barrows, doing his job, tried to muddy the water. My client is a grieving widower, he argued, his voice droning. He admits he was drinking. He admits he was angry, but he did not try to kill the boy. The boy was disobedient, ran out into the storm, and in his panic, he fell from the porch. My client, in his drunken state, simply forgot. It was a tragic accident, not attempted murder. It was Jed's word against a silent child. Kael felt Ilara trembling beside him. Then, ADA Croft called her final witness. The prosecution calls Finian Schofield to the stand. A hush fell. The defense attorney, Barrows, shot to his feet. Objection! The boy is nonverbal. He's incompetent to testify. This is a circus. The boy is traumatized, not incompetent, Croft shot back. And we have requested a support animal. The judge, a stern older woman, overruled the objection. The boy will testify. The K-9 is permitted. The courtroom door opened. Kael, who had stepped out, walked back in. He was not in uniform. He was just a man. And beside him, on a short leash, was Ghost. The dog, sensing the tension, was all business. His head high, his amber eyes scanning the room. Kael walked them to the witness box. He lifted Finn, who weighed almost nothing, and sat him in the enormous chair. Ghost sat at his feet, pressing his body against Finn's legs. Finn was tiny, his feet dangling inches from the floor, his pale face a mask of terror. He stared at his hands, refusing to look at anyone. "Finn," Ada Croft began, her voice softening, "can you tell the court what happened that day? The day with the snow?" Finn was silent. He just stared at his lap. "Finn, did Jed hit you?" Silence. "Did you run outside?" Silence. Barrows, the public defender, saw his opening. He rose for cross-examination. "Your Honor, this is proving the prosecution's point. The boy can't speak." He turned to Finn, his voice adopting a tone of false sympathy. "Finn, it's okay to be scared. You were a bad boy that day, weren't you? You broke your stepfather's bottle?" Finn flinched. "And he got angry, so you ran, didn't you? You ran outside onto the porch to get away?" Finn began to tremble. His small hand dropped from the railing, seeking the top of Ghost's head. The dog whined, a low, worried sound. "You ran, and you slipped on the ice, didn't you, Finn? You slipped, and you fell off the porch. Isn't that what happened?" "Objection!" Croft yelled. "He's leading the witness." "It's all right, counsel," the judge said. "The boy can answer. Mr. Barrows, rephrase." Barrows smirked. "Finn, just nod. Did you fall?" Finn's breathing was shallow. He looked up. He saw Jed, staring at him, his eyes dead. He saw Alara, her hands clasped in prayer. He saw Kyle, his gray eyes locked on him, projecting a strength he didn't feel. His hand tightened on Ghost's fur. Ada Croft stood up again. "Finn," she said quietly, cutting through the tension. "Finn, look at me. It's okay. I have one more question. When you were on the porch, why didn't you run? If you were so scared, why didn't you just run away?" Finn's head was down. The courtroom held its breath. The only sound was the ventilation system. He turned his head, just slightly, towards Jed. His tiny pale lips parted. A sound came out, a dry, rasping puff of air. The bailiff adjusted the microphone, pushing it closer. I couldn't." The voice was tiny, hoarse from disuse, but it electrified the room. Ada Croft froze. "Why, Finn? Why couldn't you run?" Finn looked at Kale, as if for permission. Kale gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Finn turned back to the jury. He held my hair. The words hung in the dead, sterile air of the courtroom. He held my hair." A whisper that landed with the force of a bomb. Barrows, the public defender, went pale, his mouth slightly open. He saw it. Everyone saw it. The entire defense, the flimsy, desperate narrative of a disobedient boy running, a tragic slip on the ice, had been vaporized by 4 words. A child doesn't run and fall if a 200-pound man is holding him by the hair. He is held. He is controlled. He is a prisoner. Jed Schofield's face, which had been a mask of pasty, defiant gray, crumpled. He half rose from his chair. "He's lying," he spat, his voice a hoarse croak. "The little—" "Sit down, Mr. Schofield." The judge's voice cracked like a whip. "Another word, and you'll be in contempt." Ada Croft stood slowly, her face a mask of cold, righteous fury. She didn't look at Jed. She looked at the jury. "He held his hair," she repeated, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. "He held the hair of an 8-year-old boy, in his pajamas, in a blizzard, and he beat him with a belt. And when he was done, he kicked him and left him for dead." She walked towards the jury box. "Mr. Barrows wants you to believe this was a tragic accident. He wants you to believe this was a grieving widower at his breaking point." She picked up the file from Kyle's investigation. A year ago, this same grieving widower brought this same boy to the hospital with a spiral fracture of the arm, an injury, Dr. Chavez told us, caused by violent twisting. The excuse then? He fell off the porch. She let the words hang. And a week before that, his wife, Eliza, fell down the stairs. The coroner at the time noted the lividity patterns were inconsistent with the story. She turned, and for the first time pointed directly at Jed. "This is not a man who makes mistakes. This is a monster who follows a pattern. He assaults, he controls, and he uses the weather, the isolation of this town, as his accomplice. He thought no one would ever know. He thought Finian would be buried by the snow, his secrets kept forever. But he didn't count on Gus Hatcher's headlights. He didn't count on Officer Kalen Thorne's refusal to quit. And he didn't count on the courage of this boy, who survived the cold, who survived the coma, and who just found his voice to tell you the truth." She turned back to the jury. "He held his hair. Find him guilty." The jury was out for less than 30 minutes. The verdict was a formality. On the charge of attempted murder in the second degree, how do you find? Guilty. A wave of relief so profound washed over Alara, she nearly collapsed. She gripped Cale's hand, her nails digging into his skin. On the charge of aggravated assault, how do you find? Guilty. Jed Schofield slumped, a hollowed-out shell. He was done. The judge thanked the jury and set a sentencing date. As the bailiffs moved to cuff Jed, 8A Croft stood up one more time. Your Honor, one final matter. The room quieted again. Given the evidence presented in this trial and the new testimony from the victim, the state of Montana is convening a grand jury, effective immediately, to indict Jedediah Schofield on the charge of murder in the first degree for the death of Eliza Hayes Schofield. It was the final hammer blow. Jed stopped struggling. A sound, a low, animal wail, escaped his lips as he was dragged from the courtroom. It was over. He was never getting out. Kyle looked at Alara, whose face was buried in her hands, weeping now not in grief, but in a final, agonizing release. He put his hand on her shoulder. He looked at Finn, who was watching the door where Jed had disappeared, his small hand still buried in Ghost's fur. The boy's expression wasn't one of triumph or even relief. It was just empty. The monster was gone, and now, for the first time in his life, he had to figure out what came next. Spring came to White River, Montana, not as a gentle transition, but as a violent, messy thaw. The mountains of snow that had defined the town collapsed into muddy rivers. The creeks swelled. The ice on the lakes cracked with the sound of cannon fire. And then, one day, it was over. The brown earth reappeared, and with it, a tentative, fragile green. 6 months had passed since the trial. The small, rented house Alara had taken was now a home. She had officially, legally adopted Finian Hayes. The name Schofield was buried with the snow. The cabin on the logging road had been seized by the county and sold at auction. No one in town wanted it. The house was filled with light and the scent of turpentine and warm bread. Alara had set up her art studio in the living room, and Finn was drawing too. His sketches were tentative, but they were no longer dark scribbles. He was drawing trees, mountains, and over again, a large sable-gray dog. He was in therapy. He was still quiet, a boy who preferred to listen rather than speak, but the words were there. They came out in small, shy bursts. Good morning. Can I have... Thank you. And, most importantly, I love you. On a warm Saturday in June, Kalen Thorne pulled his personal truck up to the house. He was not in uniform. He wore jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and hiking boots. The scar on his temple had faded, and the haunted, exhausted look in his eyes, the look he'd worn like a uniform for years, was gone. He was just Kyle. Ghost bounded from the passenger seat, his tail a blur, and ran straight to the front porch where Finn was waiting. "Ghost!" Finn yelled, his voice clear and bright, and he tackled the dog in a fit of giggles and clumsy affection. "Hey, buddy," Kale said, smiling. "Ready to go?" "Ready," Finn said, grabbing a baseball glove. Alara came out, wiping her paint-stained hands on a rag. She smiled at Kale. "He's been waiting by the window for an hour. Try to have him back by 5. "Yes, ma'am," Kale said. "We'll be at the park." They went to the town. Park, a wide-open green space by the now calm White River. For an hour, they were just 2 friends and a dog. Kyle taught Finn how to throw a curveball. Finn taught Kale the names of the superheroes he had been drawing. Ghost, ecstatic, chased every wild throw. Finally, they sat on a bench under a large cottonwood tree, sharing a bottle of water. "You're getting good," Kale said, ruffling Finn's hair. "You'll be on the Little League team next year." "Maybe," Finn said, shrugging. He looked at Kale, his large, serious eyes, his mother's eyes, full of a child's simple curiosity. "Kale, does your head still hurt?" Kale was taken aback. He instinctively touched the scar on his temple. "What? No, buddy. It hasn't hurt in a long time." "Good," Finn said, satisfied. He looked out at the river. Are we still friends?" Kyle felt a sudden, unexpected tightness in his throat. He looked at this small boy, this survivor, who had been pulled from a frozen tomb and had, in turn, pulled Kale from his own. He thought of the woman he had been too late to save in Helmand. He'd carried her for years, but now he was carrying a baseball glove. Yeah, Finn, Kale said, his voice a little rough. We're friends. We're family. Finn smiled. Good. Okay, Ghost, one more. He picked up the ball, reared back, and threw it with all his 8-year-old might. It was a wild throw, sailing up into the bright blue Montana sky. And as the ball flew, Finn let out a sound Kale had never heard before. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a word. It was a loud, free, uncomplicated laugh. The sound of a boy just being a boy. Ghost barked, chasing the ball, and Kale leaned back, closing his eyes, letting the sun hit his face. The sound of that laugh, clear and bright, was the final sound of the thaw. The winter was finally, truly over. Finn's story is a powerful testament to the human spirit, but it's also a profound reminder that God often works through ordinary means. A miracle isn't always a parting sea. Sometimes, it's the engine of a snowplow driven by a man named Gus, showing up at the exact second he was needed. Sometimes, it's the divine, unexplainable instinct of an animal like Ghost, a canine who could smell fear buried beneath a blizzard. And sometimes, it's the heart of a man like Kyle, broken by his past but given the courage to rewrite the future for a boy he didn't even know. In our daily lives, we are all called to be that miracle. We see neighbors in distress. We hear silent screams, just like Finn's. We get that Gus Hatcher feeling that something is wrong. Do not ignore that call. Your simple act of courage may be the miracle that saves a life. If this story of survival and divine providence touched your heart, please share it. Comment below. Do you believe in everyday miracles? And please subscribe for more stories that prove hope is never lost. May God bless you, and may He always place a ghost by your side to guide you through your storm.